Poštovane dame i gospodo, iznimna im je čast i zadovoljstvo što vas mogu pozdraviti na početku našeg današnjeg druženja na Sveučilištu VERN. Tema kojom se danas bavimo i koja je pred nama itekako je aktualna, a to je jačanje otpornosti društva na dezinformacije. Analizirat ćemo ih iz švedske perspektive. Ako smo nekad možda i mislili da živimo u doba mira, blagostanja i napretka, nažalost događaji u posljednje vrijeme svjedoče nam da to baš i nije tako i da su brojni izazovi danas pred nama. Svijet u kojem živimo pred velikim je kušnjama. Rat u Ukrajini, neizvjesnost oko toga što će u narednim mjesecima učiniti Rusija, kriza koju ova zima, sigurni smo, već svi donosi, a kad na sve to dodamo još i medijski svijet današnjice, opasnost od širenja lažnih vijesti, dezinformacija, utjecaj društvenih mreža, toliko je tema danas pred nama da mislim da sigurno će naš panel biti zanimljiv i vrviti mnogim interesantnim informacijama. Na početku dopustite mi da vam predstavim organizatore našeg panela. Zajedno su to učinili Švedsko veleposlanstvo u Zagrebu, Sveučilište VERN i Agencija za elektroničke medije, čiji će nas uvaženi predstavnici i pozdraviti na početku kao domaćini, što je uvijek red. Zato na početku riječ prepuštam švedskoj veleposlanici u Republici Hrvatskoj, njezinoj ekscelenciji Dijani Madunić. Izvolite.
Dobar dan svima. Stvarno mi je drago vas vidjeti u tolikom broju. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, let me start by thanking Professor Zrtila for hosting today's conference here at VERN University and the Croatian Agency for Electronic Media for organizing this important and very topical meeting. Where are you? There you are. Allow me also to thank our guest from the Swedish Psychological Defense Agency, Mr. Mikael Tovesson, for taking the time to come to Croatia. But honestly, I am sure he's very happy to exchange the cold autumn weather of Stockholm to the beautiful and sunny weather of Zagreb for a day. As you are all aware, the security situation in Europe has been deteriorating for quite some time, and very drastically since Russia's unjust and unlawful attack on Ukraine. As a consequence, we are faced with many difficult challenges to our security order, our territories, and also, I would say, our open, democratic and tolerant lifestyle. Therefore, the Swedish government has established this new agency tasked specifically with countering disinformation, the so-called Psychological Defense Agency. We are very pleased to have its head of operations here today to share with us their experience and understanding of the new security challenges in the area of disinformation. And let me be clear, we strongly believe that we cannot fight disinformation, misinformation and fake news alone, but we, the representatives of the free world, need to work together, primarily as members of the Council of Europe, partners in the European Union, and hopefully soon as allies in NATO. So I hope that today's discussion will help us forge new partnerships between Sweden and Croatia and join forces in making our societies more resilient to modern threats in today's interconnected world. Thank you. Hvala lijepa.
Hvala lijepa gospođi veleposlanici. U nastavku ćemo više i čuti o ovoj zanimljivoj agenciji švedskoj. Sveučilište VERN, kao što sami dobro znate, često organizira ovakve događaje poput današnjih, uvijek posvećene aktualnim temama, a kad su međunarodne sigurnosne teme u pitanju, dvojbe, dileme i sve što nas muči, znamo koga ćemo pitati. To je rektor Sveučilišta VERN, profesor Vlatko Cvrtila. Izvolite.
Poštovane dame i gospodo, želim vam dobar dan i dobrodošli na Sveučilište VERN. Neki ste možda prvi puta ovdje u našoj novoj zgradi i nadam se da ćete se dobro osjećati, jer mi se dobro osjećamo zajedno sa našim studentima. Mi osim predavanja u dvoranama seminara, vježbi, suradnji sa gospodarstvom, sa kompanijama i tako dalje, nudimo i trudimo se studentima osigurati i još određene sadržaje i načine kako im možemo prenositi znanje i kako im možemo prenositi određene izazove s kojima se suočavamo u suvremenom svijetu. Izazov dezinformiranja, obmana i ostaloga nije novi izazov. Još je Sun Tzu, veliki teoretičar ratovanja iz kineskog doba, rekao: obmana, dezinformiranje i ulazak duboko u misli protivnika može donijeti pobjedu u ratu bez da ste koristili oružje. Mislim da ova rečenica jako dobro oslikava stanje u koje se danas nalazimo i koliko u stvari to informacijsko djelovanje, mi ćemo stručnjaci reći i ratovanje, i psihološko djelovanje, psihološko ratovanje, može utjecati na naše stavove prema određenim izazovima s kojima se suočavamo. Ja bih rekao da je ruska agresija na Ukrajinu naprosto ubrzala stvari i suočila je demokratska, liberalna društva s velikim izazovom. Naravno, demokracija počiva i na slobodi medija, a upravo ta sloboda medija može ponekad biti jedna sitna ranjivost gdje se u medijski prostor uglave određeni, ja bih rekao, nepošteni akteri koji nastoje promijeniti stav javnosti prema određenim pitanjima i usmjeriti ih prema nečemu što kasnije može biti ili se može realizirati kroz socijalni ili politički pritisak. Prema tome, nalazimo se u velikim izazovima. Sveučilište VERN u okviru svojih studijskih programa ima sadržaje koji su vezani uz komuniciranje, studij novinarstva, studij odnosa s javnošću i novi sveučilišni studij cyber komuniciranje i znanost o mreži. Mislim da ova 3 studija dovoljno pokazuju koliko smo usmjereni prema svim sadržajima i stjecanju znanja i vještina potrebnih da bi mogli funkcionirati u suvremenim uvjetima i suvremenom društvu. Na kraju želim se zahvaliti Agenciji za elektroničke medije na podršci, kolegi Tomljenoviću, mi smo prije 6 mjeseci počeli o tome pričati. Želim se zahvaliti švedskoj ambasadi. Ja ću sad malo privatizirati, ja sam magistrirao 1992. godine na švedskom sustavu obrane i tada sam se susreo u pisanju sa podjelom švedskog sustava obrane na 4 sektora, dakle vojna, civilna, gospodarska i psihološka obrana, što je tada bila inovacija i na neki način moj interes se usmjerio prema tome i onda sam shvatio koliko zapravo ta psihološka obrana ima vrijednost u nekakvoj kompletnoj obrani jedne države, a pogotovo danas. Zahvaljujem se vama na dolasku, svim našim kolegama na VERN-u koji su sudjelovali u organizaciji i svima nama želim dobru raspravu. Hvala lijepo.
Hvala rektoru i dao nam je lijep uvod zapravo za gospodina Josipa Popovca koji će nam se također obratiti, ravnatelja Agencije za elektroničke medije i predsjednika Vijeća za elektroničke medije.
Hvala. Vaša ekscelencija veleposlanice Madunić, gospodine rektore, kolegice i kolege iz Agencije za elektroničke medije, dragi gosti i dragi studenti. Koji naslov našeg današnjeg panela i okupljanja je jačanje otpornosti društva na dezinformacije. No, ja mislim da ako uzmemo samo ovaj prvi dio jačanje otpornosti društva, da će nam biti sve puno jasnije. Nakon vremena blagostanja, kako je to Morana u početku naglasila, jednog lijepog života i lijepih godina, susreli smo se sa neviđenom pandemijom i tada smo vidjeli koliko smo kao društva, kao svijet ranjivi. Nakon što smo savladali donekle, još uvijek nismo do kraja tu pandemiju, zadesilo nas je nešto što nismo vjerovali da je u Europi moguće, mislili da je nešto što će proučavati samo povijest i da se ovakav zločinački pohod kakav se događa danas u Ukrajini neće dogoditi. No, ako se prisjetimo u zadnjih 10-ak godina kako je to izgledalo, kada smo razgovarali kod prvog velikog akta Europske unije, a to je bio sistem brzog uzbunjivanja, Rapid Alert System, kad govorimo o dezinformacijama, malo smo govorili možda je to puhanje na hladno. Ali danas možemo vidjeti da je to bila jedna nekinetička priprema svih ovih sukoba. Šta je ciljanje tih dezinformacija? Cilj dezinformatora je najvažniji da ostvari da društvo ne funkcionira, da društvo bude podijeljeno, da niko ne vjeruje ni u šta, ni nikome. Ono na čemu mi moramo posebno danas raditi, a naročito apeliram na studente, da daju sve od sebe, da vratimo povjerenje u institucije. Jer samo sa vjerom u institucije demokratski poredak može opstati. Naime, političko biće u demokraciji ne slijedi vođu, slijedi znanje. U diktaturama je sasvim obratno. I zato je atak ovog oblika ratovanja, o kojem je profesor Crtila govorio, upravo utjecati na znanje, na misao svakog od nas. U demokratskim poredcima ne bi li izazvali sumnje i utjecali tako na naše mišljenje. Evo, ja se nadam da će današnji panel biti jedan iskorak prema tome da razumijemo koliko smo sretni, u kakvim okolnostima, u kakvom poretku, u kakvoj zemlji, u kakvoj europskoj zajednici živimo. To su vrijednosti koje moramo očuvati i moramo svaki od sebe kao pojedinac tome dati doprinos. Hvala vam.
Hvala gospodinu Popovcu. Svi mi koji radimo u medijima znamo zapravo što je ključ našeg uspjeha. To je prije svega povjerenje naših čitatelja, slušatelja, gledatelja. Njihovo uvjerenje da ćemo im upravo mi dati točnu, pravodobnu, istinitu informaciju. No kako u današnjem svijetu možemo i u ovom medijskom okruženju u kojem živimo, gdje imamo toliko različitih izvora informacija, kako kao čitatelji, slušatelji i gledatelji možemo uopće znati da informacije koje primamo su točne, istinite, vjerodostojne? Agencija za elektroničke medije u okviru Nacionalnog plana oporavka i otpornosti provodi mjeru uspostava provjere medijskih činjenica i sustava javne objave podataka. A više o tome reći će nam gospodin Robert Tomljenović, zamjenik ravnatelja Agencije za elektroničke medije i potpredsjednik Vijeća za elektroničke medije.
Dobar dan svima, uvaženi veleposlanici Madunić, rektore Cvrtila, zahvaljujem se još jednom na suradnji na organizaciji ovog skupa. Agencije za elektroničke medije i švedsko veleposlanstvo inače već dugo sjajno surađuju, mislim dugo od 2018. od prvih dana medijske pismenosti i ovaj događaj je trebao biti u sklopu dana medijske pismenosti, morali smo ga malo odgoditi, ali moram se pohvaliti o rezultatima ovogodišnjih dana medijske pismenosti, možemo i ovo računati. Naime, u tijeku prvog tjedna svibnja održali smo 558 događanja u više od 165 gradova diljem Hrvatske sa više od 33.000 uključenih sudionika. Ja sad malo ovdje nastupam kao predgrupa prije ovog zanimljivog predavanja zbog kojeg smo se svi uključili, ali želim vas informirati o ovom projektu koje agencija je nositelj u sklopu Nacionalnog plana oporavka i razvitka u suradnji sa Ministarstvom kulture i medija, posebice ovu publiku, jer vidjet ćete, kad malo kasnije pojasnim, ovo je mjera koja je zapravo namijenjena baš sveučilišnoj i znanstvenoj zajednici kao primarnim potencijalnim nositeljima uz civilni sektor ovog projekta. Znači, kao što je Morana rekla, ovo je lijepo birokratski naslov, međutim, ovo što ću ja predstaviti odnosi se na prvi dio ovog naslova, znači na uspostavu provjere informacija u javnom prostoru, za što je iz Nacionalnog plana oporavka i razvitka osigurano 45 milijuna kuna bespovratnih sredstava. Jedan od prvih koraka koje smo napravili kada smo krenuli raditi na ovom projektu jest studija Jačanje, otpornosti, društva na dezinformacije, analiza stanja i smjernice za djelovanje glavnih autorica Marijane Grbešić-Zenzerović i Ive Nenadić uz suradnike za područje informatike. Jedna zaista jako dobra studija koja donosi analizu svih globalnih i domaćih lokalnih trendova na području medija, tehnologije, društvenih mreža, stanja u društvu, kao i svih poteza posljednjih godina i svih dokumenata međunarodne zajednice u pokušajima borbe sa dezinformacijama. Ta nam je studija i bila polazište da sastavimo prijedlog kriterija na temelju kojih će se provoditi naš natječaj za izgradnju sustava za provjeru informacija. Pozivam vas sve na mrežnim stranicama Agencije za elektroničke medije, nalazi se i studija i kriteriji, pozivam vas da to pogledate, zaista je kvalitetan i zanimljiv materijal, a nadam se da će vas zainteresirati i da se prijavite na natječaj koji će biti krajem godine objavljen. Koji je opći cilj projekta je zapravo ovo jačanje, kao što je i ravnatelj Popovac naglasio, jačanje otpornosti društva, što je ključan moment na dezinformacije, jačanje informacijske pouzdanosti u ovom svom svemiru medijskom, informacijskom kojeg se svakodnevno susrećemo, kao što je i Morana lijepo opisala. Jedni od elemenata bi trebalo biti jačanje kvalitete novinarstva te jačanje medijske pismenosti, osnova što bi trebali jačati kod građana da bi se građani znali nalaziti u ovoj šumi informacija i nažalost sve češće dezinformacija s kojima se susreću zapravo svakog trena. A specifični ciljevi za što će se dodjeljivati sredstva jesu jačanje kompetencija postojećih, ali i razvoj novih neovisnih provjeravatelja točnosti informacija, razvoj, to je isto tako jedan jako bitan element, razvoj tehnoloških programa i platformi koji bi trebali pomoći što provjeravateljima informacija, što javnosti, građanima da se znaju snaći u tome, stvaranje suradničke platforme i repozitorija provjerenih i ispravljenih informacija, te jačanje otpornosti medija na dezinformacije, poticanje kvalitetnog i vjerodostojnog novinarstva. Ono što projekt potiče, to je suradnju između civilnog društva, akademskih, obrazovnih institucija i medija. Posebice potičemo zapravo i poticat ćemo suradnju između medija, fact-checking organizacija, a posebice bi htjeli potaknuti da se prijavljuju i da se osnivaju tematski fact-checking projekti, da nisu svi projekti nekog općeg interesa, nego projekti provjeravanja informacija vezani uz teme od drugih nekih bitnih javnih interesa, poput javnog zdravlja, sigurnosti, klimatskih promjena, izbora, geopolitičkih situacija. Evo sad imamo zanimljivu temu koja će sigurno i već ima prostor razne dezinformacije, recimo uvođenje eura u Hrvatskoj. I samo za kratko još opće informacije o projektu. Dakle, projekt će se provoditi do kraja 2025. godine. Kod ovog elementa gdje će se dodjeljivati temeljem javnog poziva bespovratna sredstava, maksimalni iznos će biti 1,5 milijun kuna, a minimalni za povući 750.000 kuna. I dakle, glavni prijavitelji koji mogu nositi projekt su obrazovne i znanstvene institucije, dakle visoka učilišta, veleučilišta, škole, instituti, te organizacije civilnog društva naravno registrirane u Republici Hrvatskoj. Moći će se prijaviti jedan projekt i može se provoditi samostalno ili u partnerstvu, dok mediji mogu biti partneri, znači na projektu, manjinski partneri, ali mogu povući 30% sredstava. Dakle, kao što sam rekao, poticat ćemo zajedničke projekte i i posebice neke tematske fact-checking projekte. I samo za kraj, naravno, svi koji će htjeti povući sredstva i htjeti raditi na ovom projektu, morat će se držati načela rada. Ovo je ključno i ovome će ovisiti efikasnost njihova rada i opravdanje sredstava. Posebice se odnosi na neovisnost i transparentnost tih dionika, transparentnost ustroja, procedure i metodologije, kako će raditi, izvora vijesti, financiranja, kao i računalnih sustava, naravno druga politička, druga nepristranost. Znači, ovo je nešto s čega ćemo se strogo držati i što će biti glavni element javnog poziva koji će biti raspisan do kraja ove godine. Evo, toliko od mene. Sve se nalazi na mrežnim stranicama Agencije za elektroničke medije i Ministarstva kulture i medija. Pozivam vas da pogledate, pozivam vas i da obratite pažnju i na skupove koje ćemo održati u Rijeci, Splitu, Osijeku i Zagrebu, gdje bi baš sa akademskom znanstvenom zajednicom htjeli raspravljati i o sadržaju javnog poziva koji će ići do kraja godine. Hvala vam lijepo i želim vam ugodnu raspravu.
Hvala lijepa Robertu, vrlo zanimljiv projekt, moguće da ćemo se i uključiti, rektore. Evo, kao što smo već i čuli u uvodu, i Švedska ima odnedavno jednu vrlo zanimljivu agenciju, znači riječ je o Agenciji za psihološku obranu Ja ću vam tek uvodno samo reći par rečenica da je njezin glavni zadatak razvijati i koordinirati razvoj švedske psihološke obrane od dezinformacija u suradnji s javnim tijelima i drugim dionicima u društvu, a sve s ciljem zaštite demokratskog društva, neovisnosti, temeljnih sloboda i slobodnog formiranja mišljenja. Dakle, sve ono što doista jesu tekovine Europe. Više o samoj agenciji sad ćemo zapravo čuti iz prve ruke osoba koja zna puno više, to je gospodin Mikael Toffeson, direktor odjela za operativne poslove u Agenciji za psihološku obranu, čije će nam izlaganje zapravo biti i najbolji mogući uvod u naš panel. Izvolite, please.
Thank you very much, and I'm very happy and glad to be here. First of all, I would like to thank the ambassador, the rector, and the head of the Minister for Electronic Media to giving me this opportunity. And you have to live with me that I'm a boring bureaucrat with 36 years of background in bureaucracy, and I've never even been close to the private sector. So my presentation will be as it was in the 90s when I learned how to use PowerPoint. And it's more a help for me than you when I have this. So that's the warning sign, but I've learned from our communicators that I need to work with the expectation management here. So, and now I need to figure out where to click. This is what my presentation is going to be about. I'm going to talk a bit about the background of psychological defense in Sweden, and then I will go into what this obscure material of information influence is. And after that, you probably have a better understanding on how we think. Then I'll talk, hopefully not too long, about our organization, but there I want you to just see how we organize ourselves to respond to the problem I've talked about previously, and then talk a bit about our tasks. And then I will highlight 2 cases that we worked with this year, and then finally just give an idea of some of our future priorities. We're a new agency. We've been working with these issues even though for a long time, but we're far from even being close to where we should be. We are at the starting point in Sweden. As you saw, we are the Psychological Defense Agency, and I understand if some of you might find that definition or name scary. Psychological defense. Is this about mind games? Is it about influencing the population? Well, for us in Sweden, it's not so scary. And that's because we've had this concept for 70 years. This concept was built actually to withstand psychological warfare. And when you put it in that perspective, that psychological defense is against psychological warfare, it's hopefully not so scary anymore. It is just a reaction to something else that is even more scary. We've been doing this for 70 years, but then during the 90s, especially in Sweden, we thought things were going well in the world, that we didn't need this psychological defense, that we didn't need to have a fully built total defense that we used to have in Sweden. So we started to dismantle it. And we were looking forward to a new, more, how should I say, friendly future. So instead of total defense, we started to talk about crisis management. And this went along for several years. It went so far so we completely shut down our previous agency for psychological defense and put our effort in crisis management. But then, in 2014, something happened. And that was that a country in Europe invaded another country in Europe and lied about it and didn't take responsibility. And the rest, and since they lied about it and didn't say that they invaded Crimea in Ukraine, the response was meager, almost nothing. On the Ukrainian side, on the European side and also the North American side. No one really did anything because we are abiding the international rules, laws, and regulations. And if we cannot attribute responsibility, there will be no response. And that is what the Russians had figured out, that by using disinformation, you can actually more or less just march into another country if you have prepared the grounds. And when this happened in 2014, I was heading the Swedish National Crisis Management Center at another agency. And we were tasked to analyze and understand what was going on down there in Ukraine and Crimea and what it meant to Sweden. And one of the things we learned was that looking at the information environment during this invasion, you couldn't trust anything. There were 5 different stories for each incident. And this was spread through media, and we were all bombarded with disinformation. Sweden, you know, was in a safe corner of Europe. So we actually had the opportunity to just sit there, listen, study, monitor, and learn. And what we learned was that Russia had built a complete whole-of-society approach to conduct influence campaigns. And when we looked at it, and we really registered everything we could see there, learning in detail how they operate, who they are, what they were targeting, what the command structure looked like. And we learned some things. First of all, it's top-down. This is the President's office leading all efforts, and that's why it can be a whole-of-society approach. It is coordinated in several ways. First of all, with coordinated narratives. These are the narratives that we should send out to different target audience, their own population, to international target audience, to the Ukrainian population. And when it is big like this, it's also a bit uncontrolled. I would say that they work with evangelism, that they were sending out a message from the center, and it was picked up by their society and their actors. And some of them did a fantastic job because they are part of the Russian structure. For instance, FSB, their security service, the GRU, their intelligence organizations, they were conducting very precise operations. Some of their efforts were not so impressive, I can say. For instance, even Sweden was targeted during this year by troll activities. And we could see Russian controlled accounts in social media during the working hours of 7 o'clock to 16 Swedish time, so it would be 8 o'clock to 5 Russian time. They would speak perfect Swedish. After that, this individual who was faking to be one person started to speak English until 11, 12 o'clock in the evening. And the night hours, this account spoke Russian. Normal people do sleep. So of course, that's not so professional, but they were learning, and they were building a capability. And they were efficient, goal-orientated, and also ruthless. And when I talk about whole of society, it is about the government structures, the intelligence, the security organizations, the public diplomacy organizations, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, diaspora, cultural organizations, companies, even criminal organizations. Everyone was a part of this and operating through Europe to support the Russian efforts. Another thing that shocked us was, of course, that they were completely immune of being exposed or debunked. They didn't care if we showed what they were doing, because they knew that within 2 weeks, whatever they lied about would be forgotten in this information environment. People tend only to listen what's happening right now. And also, they just didn't care. They were just flooding the system with lies and disinformation. But the most important thing we also saw was that their primary target audience was the Russian population in itself. Those are the ones they target. And I think one should always think about that if you look at Russian disinformation targeting your country. Sometimes it is actually their prime target is their own population, and they're using your country as a bad example. And that is something we've experienced ever since they started in 2014. So anyway, and I'm not going to go through the bureaucracy here, but when that happened in 2014, Sweden started to reorganize ourselves, and we had a parliamentarian committee looking through what really happened in Ukraine and what do we need to do. And that was the starting point of actually a completely new total defense effort of Sweden. We were rebuilding the total defense with a high priority for military capabilities, but also civilians. And that is what's happening right now. And whoa, action here. I'll try to stand still. But to put it simply, what happened in Ukraine in 2014 is not going to happen to Sweden. That is actually what the effect was of all these activities. And one of these activities was to create a new agency for psychological defense. So that was a bit of the background, and I will probably have to look at the watch now and then because I tend to talk too much. And if you get bored, just wave at me and I'll move along. But now we need to go into one of the main things here. Looking at what Russia did. They invaded Ukraine. No one responded in 2014. And some ask, I usually get that question, why did they do that? Well, the answer is, of course, because they could. And we've been looking into that. Why could they do that? And why could they interfere in the US election in 2016 and have an effect there? We need to understand that. And a lot of people tend to then focus on the threat activity. What is the threat activity here, and what are they doing? And then try to shape an understanding of the situation. We actually went the other way, because we're talking about something that is incorrect, that is bad for us. So why does it work? Well, from our understanding, and this is not academic now, and I'm sorry, I'm at the university. I'm a social anthropologist by training, but today I'm only going to talk about my practical experiences. And this is something we learned from looking at all the conflicts and all the operations that the Russians have conducted towards different countries and Sweden. Disinformation, propaganda, and deception works for one reason. It works because it's incorrect and it's not good for us. It works because we're vulnerable. And what we learned is that you need to have an awareness that there is a threat. If you don't know that someone out there is going to lie to you, then you're not prepared. So the lack of awareness that there is a threat, that's where you have to begin. That's what happened in the US election. That's what happened in Crimea. No one really thought that all this disinformation is actually going to lead up to something factual. So awareness about the threat. But that's not enough. You actually also need to know what your own vulnerabilities are. What are the issues that someone can play on to control your mind, to make you decide things? So therefore, you have to have awareness about your own vulnerabilities. And then another issue here, where disinformation is playing in, because we're talking about something that's not correct, is that you don't know what's really going on. You don't have knowledge about your own society, your own system, what laws that really, how the laws works and what they really are about. So you need to have a knowledge about your own system and your own society. So you can compare that with the disinformation and then make up your mind. And then lack of coordination. And this is what happened in the US election when there were places in 2016. There were some that saw that they were subjected to foreign interference, but they didn't warn others in the system. And therefore, certain parts could protect themselves, but most of the actors were not able, they didn't even know that they were under attack. So coordination and cooperation to identify the disinformation and propaganda, and also to work together and act against it, because together we are strong. And then finally, you need to have trust in your society, in your system. So you need to build trust also, because that is the other part where disinformation plays. That if you don't believe in the government, if you don't believe in agencies, if you don't trust your own media, or if you don't trust your own academic society, well, then people will equate what you are saying with the disinformation. And of course, if you have disinformation here and facts here, it's not about standing in the middle and comparing it. It is, of course, that you have to be where the facts are. And you can only bring people there if they have trust. So these are some of the vulnerabilities that can be exploited. So we started to work with that. What are our vulnerabilities, and how can they be exploited and go through? And every country is different here. We have our own unique vulnerabilities. Then we started to look at what the Russians was doing, and we prefer not to talk about disinformation or propaganda or deception. We talk about information influence. And the reason for that is that this is someone attacking you on the cognitive arena, on your vulnerabilities. And you can actually do that with correct facts. If you portray a situation with only facts, it might be unbalanced because you're not telling the whole story. So therefore, it's more, we prefer to talk about information influence. And for us, when we look at the traits of that, for us, it has to be from abroad. And I'll come to a bit later why this is important to us. The other is it's deceptive, even though if it's correct, but it might be deceptive to you. Then it has to have that trait. It has to be antagonistic, not misinformation. It is about someone trying to harm us. And then also consequences. Because looking at it, there's a lot of disinformation going around regarding Sweden. That is antagonistic and deceptive, but we can't handle everything. We need to have an acceptance also that this exists. So therefore, when we talk about consequences, we actually talk about disinformation, propaganda, or other deception that will have a negative effect on the safety and security of our population, the functionality of our society, or our fundamental values. Freedom of speech, individual rights, our democracy, or any other severe consequence to our nation, then it is what we call information influence that we need to respond to. And another issue that we also realized when it comes to these threats, I think a lot of people try to connect this with intelligence and security services, that this is a clandestine operation that is done in the hidden arena of our society. Yes, if you're not a democratic society. What we're talking about is actually influencing other countries so they make bad decisions. That is why they do these countries. They don't do it because they like to lie. Well, they might like to lie, but they are doing this to get an effect. And to do that, you need to reach the decision makers. But in a democracy, a decision maker can't make just any decision, because then they will lose their jobs, at least every third or fourth year, perhaps even earlier if media gets hold of them. So therefore, when you are trying to do severe influence, you need to target both the decision makers and the populations that enables them to make the decision. So therefore, the main arena where we work is actually information influence. That is where we have both decision makers and the population. So therefore, traditional media, social media are the main areas, or any public space where they are together, because that is where the aggressor, the attacker, can shape our perception slowly until the day they need to attack us. then they can do the severe disinformation or influence operations. And that's what happened to Ukraine. Russia had conducted a long-term influence campaign, sowing distrust for the leadership of their country, sowing distrust for the functionality of their country. So when they really attacked, the population was vulnerable, and they could use that. But of course, to be able to do this, they need to hide both their intent, the way they do this, the vectors and methods, and the negative consequences. Of course, they try to hide it, but it has to influence us, it has to reach us. So therefore, I would strongly suggest that this is a job on the transparent, open arena. It's not a hidden, how should I say, a game for secret organizations. Another important distinction I would like to highlight also, because a lot of countries engage in this problem without making a difference whether it's internal or external. And my only comment to this is that if you have freedom of speech in a democracy, you actually have the right to be wrong in your freedom of speech. Therefore, one should be very careful about internal misinformation and disinformation, because that might infringe the individual right actually to express what you believe in. And that is why we have an open public debate where we can figure out who's right and wrong. But if we block people from expressing what they believe in the beginning, then we don't have freedom of speech. So for us, it's a distinctive line there that our society needs to actually live with the fact that there will be disinformation or misinformation in our society. And we need to work with that. That is one part. On the other hand, external actors, other nations that are trying to use disinformation or deceptive tactics to make us make bad decisions. Well, they're not a part of our democracy. They are attacking us, they're antagonistic, and there we can do whatever we like, what we think is proportionate as a response. So, so the way we differ this is actually that our agency only counter foreign malign disinformation, and that's because we're a defense organization under the Ministry of Justice. When we see the same narratives being proliferated by internal actors, we don't see them as threats. We see them as vulnerabilities. It's a vulnerability in our society that we have people spreading disinformation. But we cannot eradicate them. They have the right to express their opinion. So therefore, we need to inform them. We need to have another set of tools in our toolbox to handle that than when we handle external threats. So now I've been talking about the problems and the traits of this arena. So I will try to get now on a general level into the solutions. And this is, of course, no news. It feels like what I've already built up to is quite obvious how you need to handle it. And I would argue that, as I said before, if you know the facts, then you're not vulnerable. And that is why it's so important to have a well-educated and informed population. You need to work with media literacy, also having the techniques and source critical thinking and being able to operate and have the trust for finding the correct information. But also you need to know the reality of your situation, your society, how it works, and what really happens, especially when someone is starting to pull up old historical facts that will play in to create division and conflicts. It's so important to be knowledgeable and that the population is knowledgeable. And therefore, it's not enough in this environment that we've learned to just focus on the school here and now, and then the job is done. We need to re-educate the population constantly so they know what's going on and don't forget what's going on, because they might be bombarded with this information. Then they need to have the facts on the table. So therefore, we also have to have a strong narrative about our society, how it works, to keep that capability up. But of course, school and education, that is our best protection. So that's the baseline of protecting and creating resilience to counter foreign influence. But if they still do it, if they still conduct activities towards a country, well, then we come into the vulnerabilities I spoke of, that we need to work with awareness about that there is a threat and vulnerable population, what it is and what it looks like, and what we're vulnerable to, and also create an environment with cooperation, coordination between both agencies and individuals, everyone in one team, and then constantly build a toolbox how to respond to these threat activities, what you do as an individual and what agencies, authorities and media should do when they counter this. And finally, something that we're looking into, which is sort of connected to the trust and the social contract between the individual and the country that individual lives in. And that is the common will, actually, to defend and take risks for your society, that you believe that this society is worth protecting and worth working with. So, and these are resilience building measures. But if they continue to operate, then we need to do more things. And then we come into our operational response of this agency. I'll just say a few things, because I guess everyone is wondering, what are we doing? Are we conducting psychological operations and mind games and being destructive like the Russians are, for instance? No. The thing is, our methods, we put it out even in a handbook that is also available in English, but in Swedish, so everyone knows how we work with these issues. And we actually, when we see something going on, we start with actually just looking at it and assessing it. If it's a small thing, maybe one shouldn't do anything about it, because then you risk actually amplifying it. And usually in this media environment with low level of memory, most disinformation and deception dies out by itself. It's the viral ones that are dangerous. So we start with identifying and just assessing and following it, making sure it doesn't become viral. But if it does get traction, then we need to amplify and design the narratives and communication regarding the facts, and not talk about the disinformation. Then we will actually highlight what are the facts, and that's something we did during COVID-19, where we put out, we prioritized the government's communication to the population according to what disinformation was out there, without even talking about the disinformation. But if that doesn't work, then we need to act against the disinformation. And first, we will warn the population that there is a threat. We can talk about the vulnerabilities. And after that, we might even expose the narratives that are disinformative. We might expose the channels, the actors, the proxies that are spreading this, if they are foreign. And finally, we might go to the government and tell them that this country is now subjecting us for a large-scale campaign and operation, and then we will give them recommendations about how to counter this. So that is the ladder we have for response when something happens in real time. The guiding light for us is a proportionality. So we look at the potential consequences, and then we respond in a proportionate way, because it's so important to never leave our democratic values and the task that why we are doing this. That is, of course, to protect our democracy and the forming of free forming of opinion in our society. So, and I'm going to speed up a bit so we get time for questions and so on. So sorry, I realized I talk too much, like I do right now about talking too much. So a bit about our organization. we are a defense organization. We don't exist because we're bad at media literacy and so on in Sweden. We exist because there is an external threat. And our job is to lead the coordination and develop the work of agencies and other stakeholders in Sweden's psychological defense. And that means that we are not the psychological defense. We're the engine of the psychological defense. The psychological defense is within our society. We are also to contribute to the strengthening of resilience within the population. And that is the main part of our psychological defense. It is about influencing the population that enables the political level to make their decisions. And of course, international cooperation is one of the vital issues here. No conflict today is national when we look at the information arena, because it has no borders. We're all affected when this is happening. We have particular tasks also, and I'm going to talk a bit about how we work, so I'm not going to talk about the first parts, but I would like to highlight also that one important part here is actually working with research. Research is transparent, open, both in methodology, with the facts and the reasoning. That is the best, how should I say, vehicle for creating knowledge, because it's debatable. Everyone can have an opinion on how it came into play. So for us, research is important to build knowledge. Then we take that knowledge and put it into training and education. And after that, we do exercises to check how it worked. And this is for us a process: research, training and education, and then exercises. And that is how we build resilience in our society. I would also like to add a weird job that we got that we didn't expect. I was part of the commission that created this agency as an expert, and I'll read it. If Sweden is in a situation of war or there is a danger of war, the agency shall also be able to support the government and propose measure within its area of operation and responsibility aimed at reducing a potential attacker's ability and intention to attack. And I just want to highlight that I'm not a media literacy guy. I'm a defense organization representative. I am not objective. I am here to protect Swedish interests. And we will even, if the Russians can invade countries with influence, we need to be able to protect ourselves on that arena and be as tough as them, but not leaving the basic foundations of our democracy. The way we're organized is we have 3 departments. There's always an administrative department. We're not going to talk about that. We all know what that is. But then there is the capability development department and operations department. And the capability development department, that is an interesting piece, because that's the completely new thing with our agency. They are the ones, and I'm not working there, but they are the ones that are going to build the psychological defense in our society. They are the ones conducting and directing research, training, education, and exercises, and interacting with all players in our society. My department, our main task is to identify, analyze, and counter foreign malign information influence. So we do the nasty job when something goes wrong. So the first department, they're proactive, and we are the lazy, reactive guys at the agency. We have a Director General, Henrik Landerholm, and our agency, at the moment, we're only 46. We hired a new guy this Monday. So we're 46, and we're aiming at being around 60 by the end of this year, and we'll see, we might end up being 70. That's it. But we are only supporting the society in building the psychological defense. So we shouldn't be too many either. We're not going to be this monstrous bureaucracy in 5 years, I hope. And the way we operate in these actions, both proactively and in an operational phase. And I have to be close to a microphone here. But the way we see the society is, our society is built of capability. It's built on this social contract that enables people to trust where they live. We have buses, we have energy, we have water, we have food, we have municipality service, we have a working democracy, we have media. All these things are capabilities. Our problem is that all these capabilities also have vulnerabilities. And that is our arena, because that is what the threat actors are doing. They are trying to target vulnerabilities in our society and then push their agenda on us, so we start making bad decisions. And the way my team is operating is that I have a threat analysis team, and their job is to monitor and learn about foreign threat actors. And these can be state actors, it could be, we have problems with Islamist propaganda actors and other foreign antagonists and extremists that are posing these threats. And we try to keep track on what are the harmful narratives targeting Sweden. But then we also look at our society with all its capabilities to identify what are the vulnerabilities. And when we see that we have a vulnerability and the threat actor is trying actually to influence in that subject, it could be, it used to be migration, there was a big, and it could be social unrest, terrorism, and criminality that they would target. And right now, it's of course the energy situation and the war in Ukraine, and the Swedish perception there. So when there is a vulnerability, we see a threat, then I have the influence analysis team trying to identify what are the potential consequences here to our society. Who are the affected actors? Who could play a role in handling this? And what should the end state be if we do something to counter this? And with that knowledge, we can transfer it into our operational response team. And their job is to support me with action plans on how to mitigate or work with these vulnerabilities. So, and what we do then is try to increase capability in our society and push out the vulnerabilities. So therefore, resilience is our main tool. And I've already told what this could be. It is about creating awareness that there is a threat, that we are vulnerable, increase coordination, and support with knowledge, or actually toolbox and approach. So a lot of the times, we actually help agencies and authorities in Sweden with sending out our experts, helping them to counter the things they've been subjected to. So that's pretty much our game plan, at least in peacetime. Of course, there are other toolboxes for war, but we're not there yet. We're a new agency and we haven't had the time to prioritize that. But just to give an example, I'm going to just quickly talk about two cases. The first one is about the Islamic affairs, Shown Islamia. We were subjected to a large-scale Islamist influence campaign in the beginning of this year. And after that, I'll just say a few words on how we protected the Swedish election that we had in September. So, it's January, the beginning of this year. We have just started our agency, and we were sitting down, started to plan how to organize ourselves, how should we recruit, how is our office going to work, what about the IT, and all that messy stuff you need to figure out to start up a new agency. But then we were getting reports from other agencies and authorities that there's disinformation going around about Sweden in the Arabic-speaking information environment. And they asked us for support. So, for instance, the Swedish Institute that works with the image of Sweden, they were very active in this. And we realized that, yeah, there's something wrong here. But is it just someone bad-mouthing Sweden, lying about us, or is this something more severe? Well, what happened was, and we could see this then, this happened in January, that there was a channel called Shown Islamia, Islamic Affairs, putting out videos where they took a real incident, for instance, that a municipality childcare worker had to intervene to protect a child that was in a vulnerable situation. And sometimes through a court order, they needed actually to bring them with them to a safer environment. But these films said that Swedish government is kidnapping Muslim kids for de-Islamification or for sex trafficking. So this was severe. And they showed pictures and interviewed upset parents that show this, and it was tough. And this just became more and more. And February 19th, they were able to make this viral, and it spread. And we could see this disinformation being proliferated on channels with 1.4 billion followers. It was massive, and it was all over this Arabic-speaking Swedish environment, and people were getting really upset. And this went on, and they targeted us. And what also happened was that when agencies and authorities and municipalities and actually one of our ministers for social affairs and religious leaders in Europe went out and said, this is incorrect. They had gained so many followers at this channel, so they could target their followers and do like a DDoS. They sent large amounts of people in different social media accounts targeting, threatening our accounts. And some of our channels working for the government had hate comments every 5th to 6th second. So they were bombarding our system, and we couldn't get out with the information anymore because they choked our channels. We had an Arabic-speaking independent media house in Sweden that also tried to confront this, and they were threatened and deplatformed by these actors. So suddenly we were in a situation that someone was coordinating attacks, blocking and deplatforming the freedom of speech in media, our own opportunities to communicate to the population, and there were also threats of terrorism and violence, also targeting individual people at the municipality level. So of course it reached all the factors to be foreign malign information influence targeting Sweden. So then we stepped in. And what we did, and this is the process we worked with. At first, we saw this in January and just followed it and supported some agencies and authorities with our knowledge. But when this happened, it became viral, and we could classify it as an influence threat. The first thing we did was actually to increase awareness among agencies and authorities. And on February the 2nd, at 1 o'clock, we had an operational meeting where my analyst reported to me. And 1:37, I made the decision that this is an attack on Sweden, and told them that we need to inform government and authorities. Then the media, then we contacted actually 2 o'clock all agencies and authorities in Sweden through a crisis management meeting and informed them what was going on. After that, we realized that they were now forming demonstrations and actions in our society. So we needed to get out to the population. So after that, we went out to Swedish media and informed them, and it became viral on our part. So we were out in all media in Sweden informing that what was going on. Our problem here was that we didn't have any available correct information in Arabic. We couldn't counter this disinformation and show what was really going on. So I made the decision actually on a higher level to go for the sender. So we targeted Shoan Islamia, the channel, and put out the information we knew, that they were supporting the Islamic State. They had also supported other undemocratic movements and ideas. So we put that in front, and then we talked about the campaign and warned the population that this is a vulnerable issue. And it's very hard to measure the effects here. But this was the largest campaign we were ever subjected to. And the closest demonstration that was set up to actually by them, that was organized to actually attack Sweden in Stockholm, only had 300 followers. And I would argue that 30% was Swedish media, some right-wing extremists. So I don't know. So there weren't that many that really were mobilized by the campaign. But eventually we needed to fix this, and we set up a coordination with other governments, agencies and authorities, just to start fixing this, and slowly but surely informing the population what was going on so that we could get this out of the system. We also called in the OEC countries around on the Gulf area and MENA to hear about what was going on, so they actually could inform their governments, because a lot of people were upset. A very quick brief, just to show how we operate in the Swedish election, because I see time is flying. With the Swedish election, these are the activities that we prepared for and that we conducted. This was supposed to be our main job this year, but we haven't had time due to the Islamist campaign, the war in Ukraine, the NATO application. So we barely had any vacation this year. It's been crazy. But our role, when the responsibility of protecting the election, I would first of all say that is the election administration. They are responsible. We're just an add-on. But our role is to identify the threats and methods and warn both population and relevant actors. And then enhance capability and coordination of stakeholders, which is a bureaucratic way of saying to do training and informing other agencies and authorities on how the influence threats looks like regarding our election. And then increase awareness among the population in itself. And there we had a large-scale campaign that was called Don't Be Fooled, Bli inte lurad in Swedish, if someone speaks Swedish here, where we used, first part of the campaign, we used humor to show that an aggressor can use your feelings to make you don't think source critical or pull you into their rabbit hole. At the end, so that was the feeling part. At the end of this campaign, we did a twofold. We used magicians who actually, through, how should I say, embarrassing films with ordinary people on the street, showed that anyone can be fooled by making people look in the wrong direction. So this was also two ways of warning population. And that was, of course, connected to the threat. Russia had not prepared for an operation against our population. They hadn't pushed the general sentiments around issues during the spring. So the only thing they had left in the toolbox was to do a straightforward, aggressive campaign in the end, going for the feelings or making people look in the wrong direction. So that's why we did this campaign. And we were, of course, ready to respond if we were attacked with the methods that I just showed previously. And now, just a few words. This was the year when we were supposed to build this agency. We haven't had time for that. Luckily for this agency, it was built on a previous organization, and that I was responsible for a team at my old agency, the Swedish Civil Contingencies Agency, and that team was the information influence section. I almost forgot the name now. So we had an operational knowledge that we brought with us, but we really haven't set our organization. So therefore, we need to organize this agency now. So don't ask any tough questions on how we're organized at the moment. We haven't had time. This was more vital for us. Then next year, we have the EU presidency for Sweden. And we've been tasked to protect that role. And as a small nation, I believe you need to really focus on it, because we have seen before that Russia tries to target small nations to create the impression that small nations cannot hold the EU presidency. So that's an issue for us. Then, of course, the war in Ukraine. I haven't talked about it at all. I've just talked about how we think. And maybe there will be time for questions. There are so many things to learn from there. And we're learning constantly every day. And then, of course, starting the arduous work of building a psychological defense in Sweden. And that is about coordination, cooperation among the whole of society's actors. And then we're also now looking into how should we do if we're under attack. And we're actually now starting to talk in military term about creating thresholds and deterrence, having a strategic warning, building societal resilience, and do coordinated countermeasures. And that is the next step for us to develop, actually. So we will be ready if, for instance, Russia or another nation would try to do what they did to Ukraine already in 2014. So this is a quick run-through of us and how we think. Not much time to go into detail, but I'm, of course, willing to answer any question if there are any eventually. Thank you.
Hvala gospodinu Tofestonu. Ja ću vas zamoliti, please take your seat over there. Odmah zamoliti da zauzme mjesto za panel, jer je sad došao taj trenutak, a onda ću pozvati i naše ostale sudionike. S nama su danas dr. Nikola Brzica, stručnjak za obranu i sigurnost, bivši pomoćnik ministra obrane za obrambenu politiku. Molim vas, zauzmite svoje mjesto. Može, dapače, slobodno pljesak. Rektor Sveučilišta VERN, profesor Vlatko Cvrtila. I gospodin Tom Morin Robinson iz službe za javnu diplomaciju NATO-a. Izvolite. Gospodo, ne trebaju, hvala. Gospodo, dobro nam došli. Hvala vam lijepa što ste s nama. Ja ću vas za početak samo zamoliti da budemo brzi i efikasni. Nećemo ovako dugo odgovarati, da uspijemo što više pitanja obraditi. Naravno, pozivam našu dragu publiku da se slobodno obratite. Ja ću s vremena na vrijeme baciti pogled, samo mi maknite, dignite ruku, dobit ćete mikrofon i možete nam se pridružiti i postaviti pitanje koje vas zanima. Evo, gospodine Brzica, počet ću s vama. Čuli smo uvodno izlaganje što čini švedska agencija. Naravno, odmah to nekako poteže nam potrebu da povučemo nekakvu paralelu i pitamo se što čini Hrvatska u borbi s dezinformacijama. Bili nekakva ovakva agencija i nama dobro došla? Mi smo bili suočeni s borbom protiv dezinformacija u vrijeme Domovinskog rata, ali što činimo danas? Evo, tu je mikrofon da vas čuju i da možemo imati prijevod.
Logično pitanje, rekao bih. Znači, kolega iz Agencije za elektroničke medije je spomenuo da od 2015. već ima i napora i prepoznat je problem i bavimo se s tim, ali nažalost reći ću da osim deklarativno malo se napravilo u Hrvatskoj po ovom pitanju. Znači, od 2015. je počelo u EU sa Countering Russian Disinformation. Bilo je više napora, uključujući one od George Marshall centra u Njemačkoj, koji je pokušavao osvijestiti, rekao bi, najviše razine vlasti u Hrvatskoj vezano za taj problem i šta druge države radi usporedno da se suoče s tim. Nije tu bilo velikog pomaka, osim deklarativno. I kad je Hrvatska imala predsjedanje Europskog vijeća, deklarativno je rečeno, prioriteti su bili borba protiv lažnih vijesti, borba protiv dezinformacija, ali rekao bi glavnu ulogu su do sada vodio je nevladini sektor, neću imenovati zapravo pojedine organizacije, ali problem s tim je da pojedine organizacije nevladinog otvorenog društva i slično su zastupale ideološke. I tu je bilo određenog bijasa i nije se moglo ovako objektivno to promatrati i raditi. Tako da svakako ovakav projekat i takvo opismenjavanje je za pozdraviti, ali isto ću reći svoje mišljenje da osim edukacije i osvješćivanje, jedna velika stavka je i uloga državnog regulatora. Mi moramo shvatiti da konzumenti medija nisu, u Hrvatskoj barem, mladi. Nek su to i stariji ljudi koji promatraju, ovako reću, dnevnik i što vide u dnevniku, to vjeruju. I ukoliko nema objektivne analize, objektivnog filtriranja, pažljivo koristim tu riječ, provjeravanje navoda, tu nastaju veliki problemi, pogotovo kad demokracije imaju zapravo i najveći problem u tome što su sklone ovakvim manipulacijama. Jer takve manipulacije mogu utjecati na izbore, a izbori utječu na sve. Evo.
Hvala vam lijepa. Da, kod nas se nekako uvijek sve svede na te ideološke priče. Profesore Cvrtila, čuli smo sad da kod nas nema zapravo još nekakve prave priče o toj borbi protiv dezinformacija. Mi sad stvarno u današnjem svijetu, kad pogledate naslove, svašta čujemo. Te vlada kaos u Kremlju, te ruski predsjednik odlučuje ko muha bez glave. Citiram namjerno naslove koji sam proteklih dana našla na našim portalima. Kako vi kao stručnjak procjenjujete te informacije? Kako znate što je dezinformacija, a što je prava informacija? I što biste nama savjetovali, na koji način da sve to što čitamo danas u ovom našem prostoru medijskom, kako da tome pristupimo?
Moram reći da je izuzetno teško i raditi analize temeljem onoga što dobivamo u javnom prostoru. Ono što meni pomaže, to je konzumiranje različitih izvora, pa između ostaloga i onih izvora koji proizvode, dakle ruski koji proizvode, ali tu su i ukrajinski isto tako, jer oni su zapravo u središtu ratovanja, informacijsko ratovanje je jedan dio, važan dio toga ratovanja. S druge strane, određene spoznaje o tome kako funkcioniraju obrasci i stvaranje određenih obrazaca i ciljane pojedinih publika mogu onda identificirati, recimo to tako, određene ključne parametre koje onda mogu pomoći u određenim analizama. Nije jednostavno, nije lako. Mislim da, evo, samo kad radimo nekakvu analizu medijskih poruka u našem okruženju, onda ćete vidjeti da u našem medijskom ekosustavu, u susjednim državama, Mađarska, Srbija, Slovenija, postoje različite informacije koje ulaze u taj sustav i čini se i može se prepoznati koje su kreirane upravo za određene publike, odnosno za određeni kulturni kontekst. Dakle, to je nešto što je vrlo, ja bih rekao, sofisticirano i složeno i nije jednostavno otkriti određene stvari. Kako je cijelo naše društvo informacijsko, jako je ubrzano, mi jako brzo konzumiramo informacije, ne razmišljajući. Postoji jedna vrsta, bih rekao, kognitivne lijenosti, da pokupimo, konzumiramo informaciju koja može utjecati na naš stav i naše razmišljanje i naše ponašanje i da uopće nemamo vremena za neku dublju provjeru koja bi eventualno dovela do drugačijeg razmišljanja. To najširi slojevi društva i populacije zapravo ne mogu ni raditi. Eventualno mogu raditi i stručnjaci. Ono što je isto jedan veliki izazov, dakle, ako uzmemo primjer Švedske i činjenicu da postoji svijest o tome da takve radnje se rade, pogotovo u ovakvim međunarodnim krizama kakva je sada, ali ono za razliku od Švedske gdje imaju agenciju koja može javno komunicirati, kod nas se tim stvarima i u drugim državama bave agencije koje ne mogu javno i ne komuniciraju javno. Dakle, nije da nisu svjesne, ali one su više reaktivne nego što su proaktivne ili što bi poduzimale ili što bi mogle komunicirati i sa medijskim kućama one određene mjere koje bi mogle ipak situaciju dovesti u nekakvu normalu. Dakle, što je kriza veća, to imamo više različitih informacija, ja bih rekao sve manje onih informacija koje možemo uzeti kao pouzdane za donošenje određenih zaključaka. Jer ja ću na primjeru pandemije. Na početku se pokazala visoka razina neznanja o tome što jest zapravo pandemija i u određenom trenutku, naravno, oslonili smo se na znanje stručnjaka. Ali, kako je vrijeme teklo, tako je znanje stručnjaka manje bilo prisutno, a jako su se u medijski prostor počeli uvlačiti određene teme i teze koje su bile potpuno suprotne od onoga što su zapravo stručnjaci predlagali. Dakle, ja bih rekao da su stručnjaci izgurani iz tog medijskog ekosustava. To se danas događa i u situaciji ove krize s kojom se suočavamo, jer svakodnevno, evo, od jutra do navečer imate takvih informacija koje su i proturječne, ali koje transformiraju naše stavove i odnos prema prema djelovanju i Rusije i svih aktera u toj cijeloj priči. Mi smo na početku prije panela razgovarali o nuklearnoj prijetnji. Dakle, nuklearna prijetnja će se pojavljivati zato što je ona alat zastrašivanja. I mi danas više o tome pričamo nego možda o drugim aspektima ove krize.
Pitaću vas ja malo kasnije o tome, ne brinite. Gospodine Tofeson, napomenuli ste da dosta sad učite iz rata u Ukrajini, pa me evo to zanima koje su to lekcije i što ste to naučili tijekom ovog rata u radu vaše agencije.
Thanks. Well, what exactly? What a question, because there are so many things. But I'll highlight a few things here, because I've been to Ukraine 2015. I was there for their election, and I was there last fall also. So we've had a long cooperation with the Ukrainian authorities. The first thing that strikes me is that they have, for several years now, built a narrative of their society, so the population knows what they are defending, what they are fighting for. They have a common ground. The other thing they did, which they didn't have in 2014, was that they opened up the information environment. They let international journalists come in. They open up the infrastructure so people can communicate with each other and share information, and making even local facts available for everyone. And I think everyone must have seen that. You can really see what's going on in Ukraine. They are really also letting the information free. And I'm saying that, of course, we don't get a balanced picture of what's going on in Ukraine. But I would argue that a large part of this is that people are censoring what they're saying because they want to protect their nation. So it's a self-censoring, so they don't share vulnerable information that the Russians can do. And if you look on the other side, that here you have a society that built up and actually shows some sort of openness and trust and availability to the rest of us. That has made the opportunity for us to feel solidarity for their situation. At the same time, Russia has used the same playbook they had in 2014. So with disinformation and negative, destructive propaganda. But the biggest shift here, I would say, was what happened before the invasion. And that was that a lot of like-minded nations under the leadership of the US and the UK started to expose the Russians' plan to invade, and confronting the Russians, having them have to lie about their plans. So when they finally did the invasion, everyone knew that they were liars. So, and with that knowledge that everyone knew who was the aggressor, who was the victim, Russia lost all credibility, and Ukraine were able to pick up on that part and establish solidarity. And then, of course, using the information environment, using humor in a tough situation, using vulnerability and exposing their individuals, so we can feel that these are real people being subjected to this. That has helped them a lot. So, but there are so many things that that's just one.
Naravno, ovo je samo vrh sante leda. Gospodine Mark Robinson, ako smo nekada i mislili da nam NATO kao savez i ne treba previše, sad smo postali svjesni i važnosti zapravo povezanosti i važnosti NATO saveza. Na koji način NATO pristupa dezinformacijama? Postoji li možda u vašem sustavu nekakva slična agencija koja s njima radi i možete li se vi obratiti javnosti? Čuli smo ovdje da u Hrvatskoj postoje možda neke agencije koje rade te stvari, ali se ne mogu obratiti javnosti. Na koji način vi komunicirate s javnošću?
Thank you so much for that question. Sorry, is this? Yes,
Yeah.
That's much better. Yeah, thank you very much for that question. There's been some really interesting presentations today, both by our colleague from the Swedish Defense Agency here, and also from the Electronic Media Agency here as well, where I saw a lot of parallels with our approach. I mean, there are some differences we have to keep in mind about whole of society and what NATO does and NATO's role when it comes to communicating to its constituencies. You know, unlike a single nation, NATO, of course, is an organization of 30. We have communications capabilities and a mandate to communicate about NATO. But of course, the biggest resources, the strength and the knowledge necessary to communicate directly to societies lie primarily with our member states. So what NATO can do best here is and what it often does best, not only in the sphere of information, but is to act as a coordinator. So often, I think we've seen during this conflict before in the lead up a variety of misinformation, disinformation, hostile information activities on the part of the Russian Federation, which specifically target NATO as an organization, target the activities of NATO member states as independent states while conflating them with NATO. And what we can do basically is to cohere the NATO view and then give information back to our member states so that they can better address these issues. In terms of countering disinformation, we do have an approach. It's a two-track approach. It first relies on understanding the threat at hand. Mikhail spoke to the danger of elevating sometimes a piece of misinformation up to the level of a government agency, or elevating a piece of misinformation up to the level of an international organization. You give that credence if it's not something that actually has impact. And of course, as we know, the sheer number of misinformation and disinformation stories out there are part of the strategy. Those are built in by design. There was a great RAND Corporation report, which is about a decade old now, but seems just as relevant as it was then, where they called it a fire hose of falsehood. And I think that's really an accurate perception. So therein lies the importance of the understand function. And this is something we do where we essentially assess our own communications. What is NATO, what are our ally nations saying about a given topic? Hostile communications about this given topic. And then we bring these together and we compare them within what we call the overall earned media or information space. So how are they landing? What is the impact? Based on the assessments that we can generate from that, then we can decide, is a response warranted? At what level is the response warranted? Is this something that should, for example, if it's a piece of misinformation directed directly to NATO about a NATO exercise or NATO operation, perhaps the best place to respond would be at the level of that training exercise, if it's something that's happened very locally. And perhaps it's something that's best addressed by the national government that's been targeted rather than by NATO. So these are big questions. The second part of the approach after understand is to engage. And the biggest part of engagement really comes back to having a strong, proactive narrative rather than, again, chasing after every single piece of disinformation. So this means sticking to our values, sticking to our core tasks, remembering that many in the general public do not have a very good understanding of what NATO is, what it does, and what its priorities are. So we focus on that. And a big part of that as well is coordinating. I mean, strengthening our voice, not only within the organization, because this is a political organization of 30 member states. We need to align allies. We need to align the organization itself, both at the political level and across the different military commands we have. There's a variety of communicators there, and our strength comes when we can bring them all together so that they have the main lines, the main views, but also while permitting them to have something called mission command. I mean, this is a bit of a military term, but it's the idea that at the level of, say, your exercise or your military operation, you have a certain better knowledge of realities on the ground and how to respond. What you need from a strategic, a political level headquarters are the left and right boundaries, the key themes that should come across in your statement. But the detailed realities on the ground are some that you know best. So understand, engage, coordinate.
Gospodine Brzica, evo, sigurna sam da kao stručnjak za obranu i sigurnost pratite sve što se događa oko rata u Ukrajini i stvarno dobivamo, to je mikrofon, dobivamo različite informacije, kao što smo već u nekoliko naleta spomenuli. S jedne strane već je počeo 3. svjetski rat, govore jedni, i drugi kažu Rusija gubi rat, gotovo je, riješeno je. Kako vi gledate na tu cijelu situaciju, gdje smo mi trenutačno i kako vi kao stručnjak procjenjujete informacije koje do nas dolaze?
Ovako, krenuo bi prvo od informacija i procjene informacija. Znači, 3.3. ove godine se nešto dogodilo dramatično. Kolege su to na neki način spomenuli, ali fokusirao bi na to. Dakle, 3.3. je Europska unija zabranila pristup sadržajima od Sputnika i od Russia Today na društvenim mrežama gdje su najviše bili promovirani i diseminirani za većinu članica, za sve članice Europske unije. To je na neki način promijenilo je sigurno dosadašnju situaciju u informacijskom prostoru. Dakle, više nije bio fokus na demantiranje, stvaranje kontranarativa, kako bi rekao, projiciranje svoje istine, jer je jednostavno odsjeklo mogućnost da teze ruske dođu do nas. Isto tako, prethodno tome su Rusi u 2 navrata uvodili zakone koji su sa vrlo visokim sankcijama, mislim da je 10 godina zatvora, kažnjavali bilo koga ko se, kako bi rekao, narušavao ugled ruske vojske. Zbog toga su se i sve ove velike međunarodne medijske agencije povukle iz Rusije. I šta se dogodilo 3.3., odnosno nakon 3.3. dogodilo se da Zapad, mi nalazimo se u jednom informacijskom prostoru, a Rusija se nalazi u drugom informacijskom prostoru. Jedni i drugi su servirani informacije koje zapravo njima odgovara i koje su dizajnirane da njih uvjerava u nešto. Ovako objektivno gledajući sa strane, teško je meni sad to reći, ja pratim i rusku stranu, pratim i zapadnu stranu, ali je zapravo pravo pitanje kako promatrači iz Azije, iz Afrike gledaju istu stvar. I tu kad gledam, čini mi se da Ruski imaju bolje uspjehe nego bi ovako čovjek očekivao. Odluka od OPEC-a neki dan, ako gledamo stavove od BRICS-a, na primjer, koje kad su imali prilike glasati u međunarodnim forumima kako su glasali. To nije kako bi mi očekivali na zapadu. Što se tiče situacije na ratištu, znači nevezano za informacije, situacija je naravno složena, nezahvalno je biti prorok, ali isto tako pozvat ću se na već drugog bivšeg predsjednika američkoga Obame, koji je govorio o Ukrajini i Rusiji 2014. I kad je koristio jedan termin koji se zove escalatory dominance, znači mogućnost upravljanja sa situacijom. I to je nešto što bi se trebali i sada sjetiti. Jer Rusija i sa prijetnjama nuklearnog naoružanja i sa ipak još golemim vojnim, ljudskim i ostalim potencijalima je vrlo opasni protivnik koji meni se čini sa govorima od 2. mjeseca i ponašanjima i prije ove otvorene invazije na Ukrajinu, a i tokom ovog rata je dala na znanje da je spremna temeljito promijeniti globalnu sigurnosnu infrastrukturu. I to je nešto, ne valja se predat emocijama, euforiji, treba pažljivo razmotriti situaciju i donositi odluku temeljem toga.
Profesore Cvrtila, biste se složili onda je li u tom ratu trenutačno sa informacijama Rusija možda bolje stoji nego Zapad i naravno moram vas pitati trebamo li strahovati od tog nuklearnog napada od kojeg svako malo čitamo naslove da nam prijeti nuklearni rat, je li to istina?
Ruska agresija na Ukrajinu i taj rat koji se događa otvara, ja bih rekao, znanje o brojnim novim aspektima suvremenog ratovanja, od dronova i ne znam čega sve ne, dakle promjenama i određenih taktika i operativnih postupaka, a mislim da ćemo se najviše baviti ne toliko ovim kinetičkim oblicima ratovanja, nego zapravo informacijskim oblicima ratovanja i u tom smislu slažem se sa kolegom Brzicom da je to vrlo važna komponenta koja ima svoju naravno lokalnu, uvjetno rečeno, dimenziju, dakle u ovom sukobu jedne i druge strane. Jedna i druga strana jako koriste različite alate informacijskog ratovanja i tu možemo reći da u određenom dijelu prema zapadnoj publici Ukrajina bolje stoji. Ali Rusija, recimo to tako, bolje stoji, ako se to uopće može mjeriti, u drugim dijelovima, jer kada se uzme u obzir narativ promjene međunarodnog poretka, o kojem priča i Kina, o kojem priča i Indija, onda zapravo Rusija to upravo sada je započela i taj će se poredak mijenjati s obzirom na sve ono što u perspektivi možemo očekivati. Kad gledamo zapadnu javnost i kako su se kreirali narativi, oni su podržavali politike zapadnih političara u smislu iskazivanja solidarnosti, što je logično, pomoći Ukrajini i tako dalje. I čini mi se da svi narativi koji će se i u perspektivi stvarati upravo će ići u tom smjeru. S druge strane vidimo da Rusija pokušava te narative na neki način maknuti i uvesti određene dvojbe o podršci, jer nekako se čini da narativ ruski ide prema tome što ćete duže slati oružje Ukrajini, to će duže trajati rat, ali ćete vi stradati, jer morat ćete se toplo oblačiti, nećete imati struje i tako dalje. Dakle, mislim da tu pokušavaju konkurirati ovome empatijskom, ako to mogu reći, narativu zapadnom. U tom kontekstu i ovo spominjanje nuklearnog oružja, dakle, mislim da je jedan naš analitičar naveo 11 velikih trenutaka ili velikih govora, dakle prije svega Putina, gdje se spominjalo nuklearno oružje i ako gledamo od početka do sada, ono se pojavljuje u okviru strategije zastrašivanja. Dakle, to isto ima jasnu poruku prema Zapadu i zapadnoj javnosti, dakle ako se sve to skupa nastavi, može doći do nuklearnog rata ili nuklearnog napada. I u ovom trenutku, ako uzmemo u obzir da je to dio tog narativa, ja nemam strahova od upotrebe nuklearnog naoružanja, jer samo spominjanje nuklearnog oružja u ovom kreiranom narativu ima svoju funkciju i postiže svoju, ja bih rekao, svoju svrhu u tom smislu. Na kraju krajeva, kada stručnjaci razgovaraju i spominje se taktičko nuklearno naoružanje, koje se može upotrijebiti eventualno na frontu, ono nema onaj učinak koji ima kada se upotrijebi u gusto naseljenom području. Jer današnji vojnik, to Nikola jako dobro zna, je zapravo jako dobro zaštićen od nuklearno-kemijsko-bioloških napada u svom oklopnom vozilu ili na drugi način jer ima takvu zaštitnu opremu. Dakle, sama upotreba taktičkog ne bi donijela neku veliku prednost, ali potencijalna upotreba na nekim drugim kao dio te odmazde, ja vjerujem da se to neće dogoditi i da se zapravo nuklearno oružje sada spominje samo u kontekstu strategije zastrašivanja zapadne javnosti.
Je li tom onda kontekstu bila ova priča o ovom vlaku koji je prevozio to oružje, to je isti sastavni dio tog, da?
Rusija jako dobro generira sve ono što je vezano uz to, od spominjanja Sarmata, od puštanja u medijski prostor moći Sarmata, svako malo se pojavljuju hipersonične i druge rakete, podmornica nestala i tako dalje. To su sve dijelovi te, ja bih rekao, kompletne slike koja je vezana u strategiju zastrašivanja.
Odlično. Malo nam je sad ipak lakše, barem meni moram priznat. Podsjetit ću publiku da slobodno se uključite sa svojim pitanjima, tu smo ako ih imate. Gospodine Tofeson, evo dok dođe mikrofon ja ću postaviti jedno pitanje, pa može. Evo gospodine Tofeson, čuli smo da se puno toga u današnjem svijetu mijenja, a ono što se jednako tako mijenja se i priča o švedskoj neutralnosti. Mislili smo da je to nešto što se nikada neće promijeniti. Je li došao taj trenutak da Švedska postane članica NATO-a i da odustane od svoje neutralnosti?
Yes.
Ovo je bio kratak odgovor, odlično, može, pitanje iz publike, slušamo.
Morana Bencol iz Ministarstva obrane, odnosa s javnošću. Zapravo sam se htjela nadovezati na odgovore gospodina Brzice i gospodina Crtile. Zanimljivo mi je, nisam očekivala na ovom događaju da će se spominjati prijetnja nuklearnim naoružanjem. Dezinformacije da i cijela priča oko ruske propagande, ali ne mislite li Evo, za vas odmah pitanje, da ovo zapravo pokazuje uspjeh propagande ruske, jer mi na ovakvim događajima, na ovakvim mjestima, studentima, među ostalima, pričamo o prijetnji nuklearnim naoružanjem. Ne smatrate li da je to već uspjeh te propagande?
Je uspjeh.
Jer nije samo, znači ovo nije da radimo sad nekakav ovakav događaj u Ministarstvu obrane, nekako bi više očekivala da ćemo o tome razgovarati, nekako nisam očekivala ovo danas.
Kad govorimo o kreiranju narativa i korištenju određenih sadržaja u tom informacijskom ratovanju, nuklearno oružje je nešto što će uvijek zauzeti pozornost javnosti i to najšire moguće, ne samo stručnjaka, nego najšire moguće javnosti, s obzirom da smo naprosto u povijesnom kontekstu tu tragediju koja se dogodila na kraju Drugog svjetskog rata memoriramo kao strašnu tragediju koja nije samo u kontekstu nekakvog završetka ratovanja i tako dalje, nego je civilizacijska tragedija. I postojanje nuklearnog oružja je uvijek otvaralo pitanje potencijalnog korištenja. Međunarodna zajednica, a velike sile su se pobrinule za režime neširenja, jer je potencijalno vrlo opasno i znamo da postoji Sjeverna Koreja koja je neodgovorna država, to je vrlo blagi izraz, koja ima to naoružanje i koja ga potencijalno može koristiti. Dakle, to je taj jedan strah od apokalipse i kraja ovog civilizacije, nešto što će sigurno ja bih rekao, pozornost javnosti usmjeriti prema tome. I to će se i dalje koristiti. Ja sam siguran da će se još povremeno, kada treba skrenuti pozornost sa određenih događaja ili određenih procesa, da će se upotrebljavati nuklearno oružje kao tema. Sigurno ćemo i još do kraja imati. Ja nekako kroz ovu svoju analizu kažem Morana da je sada lakše, ali naprosto ne mogu kao racionalna osoba prihvatiti potez ili nečiju odluku koja bi u stvari značila uništavanje civilizacije. Kissinger je jednom rekao, onaj ko prvi potegne i pošalje nuklearnu raketu, umire drugi. Sve je jasno u tom smislu i to nas zapravo kao pojedince, to je tema koja nas zapravo mora zainteresirati i zato je toliko prisutna u narativima.
I ja isto smatram da se upravo koristi zapravo kao dezinformacija u velikoj mjeri, odnosno kao igra informacijama, jel tako da iz tog naroda dovoljno mediji zapravo tome posvećuju užasno veliku pozornost.
Mislim, ovako bi ja rekao, znači ovdje se sigurno vidi moj neki background u upravljanje rizicima i rekao bi da kad detektiramo, definiramo rizike i scenarije, onda trebamo biti jako pažljivi da naši osobni stavovi ili ne projiciramo wishful thinking na situacije koje bi mogle biti. Vlatko je napravio odlično je ukazao na razliku između strateškog i taktičkog nuklearnog naoružanja. Ja dugo se bavim s vojnim pitanjima i po profesiji sam vojnik i znam sovjetski sustav kako je funkcionirao prije na taktičkoj razini, kako se vježbe odrađivale i kad gledam da njima nije uopće bilo strano upotreba taktičkih nuklearnih naoružanja u redovitim vježbama, konvencionalnim vježbama, onda ipak ja mislim da tu postoji određena opasnost. Ne bih sad kako bih rekao, ne bih to sad rangirao, ali nije da je to samo propagandna tema. Realna je ta mogućnost. I to je nešto o čemu trebamo voditi računa. Pogotovo bi se upozorio bi na to da je Putin već u više navrata davao poruke koje ukazuju na to da ukoliko je Amerika bila spremna ili bacila atomske bombe 1945. na Hirošimu i Nagasaki, sugestija je zašto ne bi mi. Znate, to je nešto ozbiljno i ako Rusija nastavi sa lošim rezultatima, ja mislim da je ovo nešto što njemu postaje atraktivnija opcija.
Dobro. Izvolite, da, gospodin.
Thank you. I did want to speak to that fascinating question a bit as well. First on the idea of tactical and strategic, right? I mean, we have this idea of a tactical weapon as something that can accomplish an operational objective on the ground, something limited, and a strategic weapon as something that fundamentally alters the circumstances, right? And I would venture that any use of any kind of nuclear weapon, whether it be tactical or whether it be strategic, is strategic and is something that would fundamentally alter the nature of the conflict. And this is something the Secretary General has said many times in his responses to Russia's irresponsible saber rattling on this topic. It's really something that would fundamentally change the West's view of the conflict and demand a response. I think in terms of deterrence, there's the role that NATO has played in this conflict from the very outset has been twofold. There's been two objectives, one of which is to support Ukraine as much as possible, and the second has been to prevent the escalation of the conflict. And in terms of deterrence, we've continued to reinforce our posture on the eastern flanks, so I don't think you can point to any deterrence there. And in terms of support for Ukraine, that has done nothing but increase. So again, I would venture to say that thus far we have not been deterred on that.
Yes, and Sweden has been subjected to also the nuclear threat on several occasions, also this year. Mm-hmm. So we're more or less getting used to it from the Russians. So I'm not going to joke about it and say we're not impressed, but still, they've been playing that. And of course, we've had a lot of discussion in Sweden also how to handle that threat, because it is, I think, a lot of the perception of the nuclear threat is built on how we perceived it in the 80s with the global annihilation of our society. And what we realized was that this is not the modern nuclear threat. And it's not the same thing as in nuclear energy catastrophe. That can actually be worse. So the problem here will be how to communicate if it happens. Because the thing is, no one here can predict what it would be like. We tried to influence Russia not to invade Ukraine, and they did it anyway. So the decision of using nuclear weapons is out of our hands. But our main problem here is that when it happens, it's probably not going to be that awful that we are perceiving now. And this is a risky thing to say, you know. But in influence perspective, first of all, we need to not run into the area where they want us, and that is the speculation that we are doing right here, right now. And the other is to have a plan for handling it if it would happen, because then they might use a tactical level weapon for a strategic effect. So how do we play that role in creating resilience? Because otherwise they'll win, and they will always have nuclear weapons. So then we've given up. So there are other things at stake here. And I would also like to add, when the Russians introduced the thermobaric weapons in Ukraine, that was also explained as projected as a doomsday weapon. And still Ukraine is winning now on the field. So I would encourage everyone also to try to have some sort of positive outlook on handling this.
Profesore Cvrtila, spomenuli smo malo proširenje NATO-a. Ukrajina je podnijela zahtjev službeni za članstvo u NATO-u. Čuli smo i gospodina Tofesona, Švedska želi biti članica NATO-a. Kako gledate na taj proces proširenja? Je li on potencijalno nekakva daljna opasnost za eskalaciju sukoba?
ulazak Švedske i Finske ne, jer je sama najava i slanje aplikacije za ulazak u NATO nije izazvao nekakvu burnu reakciju, ajmo da tako reći, Rusije, dok s druge strane Ukrajina je ipak nešto drugo. S time da naravno situacija nakon agresije sada različita. Ako je to bilo ključno strateško pitanje za Rusiju i jedno od opravdanja zašto su počinili agresiju, mada nema nikakvog opravdanja za napad na jednu drugu suverenu državu, a onda je sada situacija nešto drugačija, ajmo to tako reći, ali nisam baš siguran koliko su sve članice NATO-a na strani jake podrške ulasku Ukrajine u NATO. Pomoć da, naoružanje da, svaki oblik pomoći humanitarne, ekonomske da, ali ulazak u NATO mogao bi biti još jedna točka, ili brzi ulazak u NATO, još jedna točka koja bi mogla izazvati ili otvoriti barem perspektive nepredvidivog. A mislim da nam sad sve više treba predvidljivosti u ovome sukobu koji predugo traje za 21. stoljeće u europskom prostoru, nego što nam treba neizvjesnosti i nepredvidljivosti.
Ako ima još koje pitanje, pitaću publiku. Ima, evo ga, može. Nažalost ne vidim od stupa, pa onda...
I'll ask this in English for Mr. Tom and Mr. Michael. I apologize if I say your name wrong, but since now Sweden and Finland are officially candidates for joining NATO, in case Russia decided to, let's say, surprisingly mobilize and attack NATO members, would Sweden and Finland join the war, or would they stay neutral since they're not officially candidates? I know this is not really a question about this topic, but it's a rare opportunity to have you here, so I might as well ask.
Yeah, well, I'll lob the microphone to the ambassador here, who represents Sweden. It's impossible to answer that question, but what I can say from a strategic communication perspective, if you had been in Sweden recently or Finland, you would notice that there are a lot of NATO forces around. And you also see a lot of Swedish and Finnish forces conducting exercises together with NATO forces. That is in itself a signal. We also had the other question here. Russia is crippled. What could they really do? Do we see them as a military threat right now, even though if they would mobilize, which they are, but hey, how is that going? We did a swift, quick exercise just a few weeks ago in Sweden, where we had a normal exercise up north, and then suddenly we just raced with several units, troops, artillery, into Finland, and grouped together with them for a defensive position, which was also, of course, a sign that if a certain country would like to threaten us, we will stand our ground. So everything is on the table, and I think it would be wise for Russia to see that this is for real, because, hey, Sweden, we're sending weapons to Ukraine, then we only sell weapons to countries that will not go to war. So that's, I think our position is firm. And then when I answered to the NATO, it wasn't my opinion. It was my government that has decided through the support of the parliament. So I have no opinion. I'm just a meek bureaucratic civil servant that will do what my government tells me to do.
You say that's too much. I don't think so, but okay. Ima još koje pitanje ili morat ćemo nažalost privoditi kraju naš današnji panel, jer nam je vrijeme užasno brzo prošlo, to obično tako biva, pa idemo samo na zadnji onda krug pitanja. Gospodine Brzica, malo smo nešto spomenuli Hrvatsku i našu borbu sa dezinformacijama i kako bi to trebalo izgledati. Kad biste vi bili sad u prilici dati savjet Vladi Republike Hrvatske, što znam da jeste, što biste ih savjetovali i na koji način da se u buduće i mi organiziramo i postavimo prema borbi protiv dezinformacija?
Ja bih savjetovao da se krene sa pisanje strategijom o obrani u informacijskom prostoru. Ili, evo, Švedska je to nazvala u psihološkom obranu. U Hrvatskoj se trebaju razviti institucije i strategija za zaštitu našeg informacijskog prostora. Mi sad govorimo o Rusiji, ali osim Rusije ima i drugi aktera negativni koji su prisutni u Hrvatskoj i ko prati to područje i analizira vidi da su štetne posljedice već i sada. Znači kasnimo već s tim. To bi bio moj savjet.
Profesore Crtila, čuli smo u uvodnom izlaganju, gospodin Tofeson je rekao koliko je zapravo važno i educirati mlade ljude. Rektor ste sveučilišta, na koji način bismo trebali pristupiti tome da naučimo mlade ljude koji su danas pod velikim utjecajem društvenih mreža za razliku od starije publike o kojoj je gospodin Brzica govorio, koji dalje gleda dnevnike i prati na našu veliku sreću televiziju, ali znam, pošto i sama radim na sveučilištu VERN, koliko mladi sve manje prate klasične medije, a više su na društvenim mrežama, kako ih zapravo uputiti da ne podlegnu dezinformacijama, kako ih naučiti da budu medijski pismeni i da znaju prepoznati pravu informaciju.
Mislim da je gospodin Dosan rekao, zapravo obrazovni sustav je mjesto gdje se u stvari može djelovati na najširi mogući način i čini mi se sa najvećim učinkom. I u tom smislu ne samo da država mora poduzimati, nego ono što smo i vidjeli iz ovoga projekta koji pripremaju iz agencije i vijeća, zapravo to mora biti najšira društvena zadaća. Dakle, i država, i obrazovne institucije, i civilno društvo, mediji isto tako moraju zajedno biti u toj cijeloj priči da bi se moglo onda aktivno djelovati. Ali naravno bez strategije i bez poznavanja izazova s kojim se suočavamo, toga rezultat će biti vrlo slab. VERN je davno prepoznao određene potrebe, recimo to tako, proučavanja suvremenog prostora komuniciranja, pa smo i razvili sveučilišni studijski program cyber komuniciranje i znanost o mreži, upravo da otvorimo raspravu o tome što suvremeni ekosustav nama nudi, kako se u njemu snalazimo, gdje tražimo istinu i da li istinu uopće ima. Mislim da je obrazovni sustav od najmanjih generacija jako bitan prostor gdje se može djelovati, ali bez odgovarajuće strategije i spoznaje izazova s kojim se suočavamo, teško da ćemo bilo što napraviti.
Gospodine Tofeson, puno ste nam toga već rekli, ali evo spomenuli ste malo i te društvene mreže, pa me zanima švedski primjer na koji način vi pokušavate na mlade ljude utjecati, da ih naučite da znaju prepoznati prave informacije.
Well, first of all, that is the role of other agencies or authorities and organizations in our society. We prefer not to have the defense perspective first. So when it comes to the media literacy, we actually have our own agency for supporting youth in how to operate in the media environment. And it's very split up. It is a very complicated environment. But I would also, add on that, so I'm going to come with a recommendation to Croatia here. Which just follows up on your arguing that when doing this, we have to have the actors that are interacting in our society have to be objective and free. So interacting with the youth, you have to have NGOs and civil society organizations that are non-biased. And the government's role here could be to finance without any demands. The same way we need to have the same relationship with traditional media. Social media, traditional media, they go together. So for instance, in Sweden, we support journalists. We give them training in how to operate in a foreign threat environment in the information space. But we don't do it ourselves. We go to the academic world. So we go to the universities, and they are, so how should I say, the implementers of this. We just give the money and we're available for methods. And that role, I think we need to play with not only the youth, but all sectors that have objective partners there. And I would also just like to throw in another perspective we haven't talked about at all. But when it comes to foreign threat actors and the gender perspective here, we need to actually also focus on how the women and children are the targets of a lot of these threats. They're playing on old roles, especially the Russian influence, that will try to push us in a corner and disenfranchise certain groups. So objectivity becomes a very important tool in this playbook to counter.
Hvala vam lijepa. I gospodine Maureen Robinson, evo vaša završna riječ, na koji način ćemo zapravo u budućnosti, će se NATO boriti protiv dezinformacija, postoje li neki konkretniji planovi što se planira učiniti u budućnosti? Mene zanima jednako tako i vaše stajalište oko proširenja NATO-a, možemo li ga uskoro očekivati?
Thank you for those questions. First on where we're going, a lot of the capabilities we've been developing on fighting disinformation are not that old. I mean, I think like the Swedish Psychological Defense Agency getting set up now in this way, this is something we've started paying a lot closer attention to after 2014. So there are still many of the capabilities we've been developing, especially around assessing the information environment, that have been being built as we've been using them, and the lessons learned that are coming out of that have been improving them year on year. So we still have a ways to go on some of the methods and approaches we're taking to doing this. So I see some continuity there. I think evidently the war in Ukraine is going to bring a vast amount of lessons learned from Ukrainians that we can take on. They will now be the most experienced fighting force who have faced the Russian Federation. There are lessons there, and there are things we'll have to take from that, including on disinformation. So I see that coming as well. On Finnish and Swedish accession, I mean, they are formal invitees. The accession protocols were signed before the summer. We have 2 remaining states left to ratify. It's the fastest ratification in NATO's history. And it's something that will improve security for Finland and for Sweden, and it's something that will improve security for NATO. So it's all allies are fully committed to Article 10 of the North Atlantic Treaty, and this goes right back to that document.
Hvala vam lijepa, gospodo, hvala vam puno na sudjelovanju. Naravno, uvijek vrijeme, nažalost, brzo prođe. Sigurna sam da je još mnogo pitanja, ali evo, sačuvat ćemo ih za neki drugi panel. Hvala Švedskom veleposlanstvu, Agenciji za elektroničke medije i Sveučilištu VERN na organizaciji. Naravno, hvala svima vama što ste bili s nama danas i što ste nas pratili do nekog našeg novog susreta. Hvala vam i doviđenja. Malo smo premašili vrijeme, ali dobro, nije dobro za užas.